She changed the locks on my grandmother's house and moved in, while I was at work. No warning, no permission, just decided it was hers now. My name is Nina, I'm 29, and I've worked as a nurse in a public hospital for the past 7 years. My life has never been glamorous, but it's been honest. I get up early, work 12-hour shifts, and come home to my tiny studio apartment, where I barely have space to turn around. But I never complained, because I had her. My grandmother. Grandma raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 9. She was my world. Strong, stubborn, and full of love, she taught me how to cook, how to budget, how to survive. She supported every exam I studied for, every hard shift I came home crying from. When she passed away 6 months ago, it broke something in me I didn't know could break. She had a modest little house with creaky floors, crocheted curtains, and a garden full of wild mint. I was staying there on weekends, slowly packing her things, watering her plants, and grieving in my own quiet way. I didn't rush through it. I wanted to say goodbye properly. And then, Sierra happened. Sierra is my cousin. Well, technically my second cousin. Her mom and my grandma were sisters. We were never close. She was always the spoiled one, bouncing from job to job, temporarily crashing on couches, and always posting influencer-style photos with clothes she clearly couldn't afford. After the funeral, she started showing up more often. "Just checking in," she said, wandering the house, taking photos for memories. I felt uncomfortable, but I was too polite to say anything. Grandma would have wanted me to be kind. Big mistake. Last week, after a brutal overnight shift at the hospital, I stopped by Grandma's to grab a few books and rest in the sunroom, her favorite spot. But when I pulled into the driveway, something was off. The porch light was on, new wind chimes were hanging by the door, and there was a silver car in the driveway that I didn't recognize. At first, I thought maybe one of the neighbors was over, but then I tried the door. Locked. Not just locked, deadbolted. That was strange, since I was the one who had the only key. I knocked. Sierra answered in a silk robe and a towel on her head, like she'd just stepped out of a spa. "Oh, hey," she said casually, like nothing was weird. "I was gonna text you." "Why are you in Grandma's house?" I asked. My voice was shaking. She smiled. "I live here now. Didn't your mom tell you? It just made sense. You've got your own place, and I really needed somewhere stable." I stood there in stunned silence. She walked back inside, leaving the door wide open behind her, like I wasn't even a threat, like I didn't belong there. The worst part? When I stepped inside, all of Grandma's furniture was gone. The floral couch, the rocking chair, even the little wooden table she used to press flowers on. Gone. In their place were cheap IKEA shelves, neon artwork, and, God help me, a neon pink beanbag. I felt physically sick. Sierra stood in the kitchen, making a smoothie. "Don't worry," she said, not even looking up. "I sold most of the old stuff online. It was time for a refresh." I couldn't breathe. "You sold her things?" I managed to say. She rolled her eyes. "Relax. It's not like she's using them. Besides, I'm family too." That sentence lit something inside me. For years, I had been the one by Grandma's side. Hospital visits, medications, late-night calls, everything. Sierra only ever showed up when she needed money. And now she was standing in my grandmother's kitchen, blending kale and banana like she'd earned it. I left before I said something I couldn't take back. Later that night, I called my aunt, Sierra's mom, to demand an explanation. She sighed like I was the one being difficult. "Sierra needed the space. You're single. You don't have kids. You don't even live there. Let it go, Nina. Family helps family." That's when I realized. To them, I wasn't family. I was convenient. I was disposable. But not anymore. Because what Sierra didn't know was that Grandma had a will, and I hadn't even told them yet that the house legally belonged to me. I sat in my car for nearly an hour after leaving the house, gripping the steering wheel with both hands, trying not to scream. The rage simmering in my chest made it hard to breathe. I wasn't just upset. I felt violated, like Sierra had walked into a sacred space, ripped out everything warm and familiar, and replaced it with her shallow, glittery version of home. But the worst part? She didn't even flinch. No shame, no apology, just a smoothie and a shrug. I didn't sleep that night. I kept pacing my apartment, replaying her words over and over. Relax, it's not like she's using them. That line echoed in my head like a slap. My grandma's couch, her wedding china, her books and photos, gone. Replaced by string lights and knockoff designer bags. By sunrise, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't let this slide. Not anymore. The first thing I did was call the lawyer who handled my grandmother's estate. I'd never read the will in full. I'd trusted the process. But now, I needed the details. I needed confirmation. The lawyer was kind and straightforward. He emailed me a copy of the will, and there it was, in black and white. I, Loretta Monroe, leave my home and all belongings therein to my granddaughter, Nina Grace. All of it. The house, the contents, everything. I sat in silence, blinking at the screen. Sierra had no legal claim to the house. She had no right to sell anything. She wasn't even mentioned in the will. I felt this rush of vindication, but it was quickly drowned by a heavier emotion. Grief. Grandma had trusted me, she'd chosen me, and I had let this parasite waltz in and desecrate her memory. I printed the will, tucked it into a folder, and drove straight to the house. I rang the doorbell twice before Sierra finally opened it, wearing a sports bra and yoga pants, holding a coffee like she was the queen of the cul-de-sac. You again? She said with a sigh. I pushed past her before she could stop me. Where's Grandma's jewelry? What? You heard me. The ring box, her necklace, the brooch she wore to church every Sunday. Where is it? She blinked, then had the audacity to laugh. Oh, that stuff? I sold it last week. Got a good price, too. Vintage is trending. I froze. You sold her wedding ring? It's just a ring, Nina. Don't be dramatic. I didn't answer. I just pulled out the folder and placed it on the table. What's this? She asked, flipping it open. The will, the house, and everything in it belongs to me. Legally. Her smile vanished. You're lying, she snapped, but her voice cracked. I shook my head. I'm giving you 48 hours to vacate. After that, I file for an eviction notice and report everything you sold as stolen property. Jewelry, furniture, photos, all of it. Her face twisted into something ugly. You selfish bitch, she spat. You never even cared about her. You're just doing this because you're bitter and alone. That hit harder than I expected. But I didn't flinch. No, I said, my voice steady. I'm doing this because I did care, and you didn't. She stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I left the house shaking, but determined. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. I wanted my grandmother's memory respected. But Sierra wasn't done. 2 nights later, I came home from work and found my apartment door slightly ajar. My stomach dropped. Inside, everything was trashed. Drawers pulled open, pictures knocked off the wall. My grandmother's photo, the one I kept beside my bed, was torn in half and thrown on the floor. And on the kitchen counter was a single sticky note. If I can't have it, neither can you. I stood in the middle of my apartment, trying to steady my breath as I looked around. The drawers had been dumped out, my mattress slashed open, and my kitchen cabinets emptied. The framed photo of Grandma that used to sit beside my bed was now torn in half and tossed near the trash. It was personal, deliberate, violent. And I knew exactly who had done it. Sierra. She'd gone too far this time. This wasn't some petty squabble over who got what. This was malicious destruction of private property. I felt the familiar burn of tears forming, but I refused to let them fall. I wasn't going to cry. Not this time. I called the police and filed a report. An officer came, took photos, and asked if I suspected anyone. I didn't even hesitate. I told them everything about the house, the will, the furniture, The jewelry, the threats, everything. The officer nodded slowly, took notes, and said they'd follow up. I spent that night at a coworker's apartment, trying to piece together what I'd do next. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Sierra laughing as she ripped apart what little piece I had left. The next morning, I woke up with a different kind of energy. Not fear, not sadness, focus. I took the day off work and went straight to the courthouse to file an emergency restraining order and begin formal eviction proceedings. The paperwork was dense, but I read every word. I wanted every T crossed, every I dotted. Sierra wasn't just stealing a house anymore. She was erasing the last traces of my grandmother and daring me to stop her. That same afternoon, I got a call from a friend who worked at a local vintage shop. I'd sent out a few feelers in case any of Grandma's jewelry turned up. "Nina," she said, "I think I found something. You should come in." My stomach flipped. When I got there, she led me to a locked case and pointed. Inside, nestled in black velvet, was my grandmother's blue topaz ring. The one Grandpa had given her on their 40th anniversary. The one she wore every Sunday, even after her hands grew frail and thin. I couldn't breathe. The shop owner said it had been sold by a woman named Sarah, Sierra's favorite alias when she didn't want a paper trail. But she'd made a mistake. She left her phone number on the consignment form. I took a picture of it and added it to the growing folder of evidence. By the end of the week, I had a full timeline, police report, restraining order, legal will, and proof of property theft. I was ready to take her down, legally and cleanly. But Sierra wasn't done playing games. That Saturday, I went back to Grandma's house to take photos for the eviction process. I expected chaos, maybe some loud music, maybe her friends over pretending it was theirs. What I didn't expect was an open house. A realtor's sign sat on the front lawn with balloons. The front door was wide open, and strangers were walking through my grandmother's home like it was up for sale. A tray of cookies sat in the kitchen, next to brochures labeled, "Charming cottage, recently renovated, asking price $380,000. I nearly passed out. I walked straight up to the woman in the suit and asked what the hell was going on. She looked confused and said she'd been hired by the owner, a woman named Sierra Monroe, who claimed the house had recently been transferred to her through family arrangement. I pulled out my phone and showed her the will, the eviction notice, and the restraining order. Her face paled. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I had no idea." I turned and saw Sierra walking down the hallway in heels and a fitted dress, beaming like it was her wedding day. When she saw me, her smile vanished. "You need to leave," she hissed. "No," I said, stepping forward. "You need to explain why you're selling a house that legally isn't yours." She faltered for a second, then did something I never expected. She laughed, loud, fake, unhinged. "You really think this is about Grandma's house?" she said, stepping closer. "You think this is just some petty grab? No, Nina, this is about everything. She always loved you more. You always had it easier. I'm just evening the score." And that's when the front door opened, and 2 police officers walked in. One of them looked at Sierra and said, "Sierra Monroe? You're under arrest for burglary, theft, and destruction of private property." Her face dropped. "Wait, what?" "You're making a mistake," she shouted, as they cuffed her and led her out past a group of stunned open house guests. Comment the number 1 if you want to see what Sierra does next, because trust me, she's not done yet. The image of Sierra in handcuffs was something I thought would finally bring me peace. And for a moment, it did. She was screaming as they led her away, throwing wild accusations, calling me a thief, a liar, even saying I had forged the will. But the officers didn't even blink. They had the documents. They had the timeline. They had everything. I stayed behind as the realtor apologized profusely, packing up her signs and cookie trays while whispering to potential buyers that the showing was canceled. Strangers filed out, eyes wide, some whispering things like, "What a psycho," under their breath. And I just stood there, in the middle of Grandma's house. My house. The silence after they all left hit harder than I expected. For the first time in months, I was alone in that space. No Sierra, no lies, no chaos. Just the faint smell of mint from the garden and a half-empty glass of orange juice she'd left on the counter. I should have felt victorious, but I wasn't done. Sierra had pushed every boundary. She'd sold family heirlooms, trashed my apartment, tried to erase Grandma's memory, and now she'd attempted to illegally sell the house. There was no telling what else she'd done, or what she'd try to do next once she got out on bail. I wanted her out of my life permanently. No loopholes, no manipulation, so I kept going. I contacted every buyer she'd approached and sent them legal notices, warning of the pending investigation. I froze any attempt she'd made to transfer utilities, and I personally filed paperwork with the city to flag any future sale attempts tied to her name. The restraining order was extended, and I added the house's address to it. Then, I turned my attention to the missing items. The vintage shop helped recover Grandma's topaz ring, but dozens of things were still gone. Her antique locket, her silver tea set, a carved wooden box that had always sat on her dresser. I assumed they were lost forever, until I remembered something. 2 weeks before Grandma passed, she asked me to help her organize her closet. While I was clearing out the top shelf, she'd handed me a small, faded box and whispered, "If something ever happens, don't let anyone touch this but you." At the time, I thought it was just sentimental. I had carefully wrapped the box in a scarf and placed it in the crawl space behind her dresser. That night, I returned to the house alone and went straight to the crawl space. I pulled back the paneling and reached in with trembling fingers. The box was still there. Inside were dozens of tiny envelopes, each labeled in my grandmother's shaky handwriting. There were photos, receipts, even letters. One envelope caught my attention immediately. Sierra, 2019. I opened it. Inside was a letter, a signed confession. It was dated 4 years earlier. To whom it may concern, this letter serves as acknowledgement that Sierra Monroe stole $12,500 from my checking account using my debit card while living with me. I confronted her, and she promised to return it. She never did. I'm keeping this on record in case of future incidents. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about the house. Grandma had known. She'd documented everything. There were other letters too. One about a necklace Sierra pawned in 2020, one about damage to Grandma's car, another detailing how Sierra had taken prescription pills and sold them online. All handwritten, all signed. This was my nuclear button. I made digital copies, time-stamped everything, and handed them over to the police. The investigator handling the case looked stunned as he flipped through the documents. "This isn't just a property dispute anymore," he said. "We're looking at fraud, theft, elder exploitation, maybe more." I nodded. Use it all. Within a week, Sierra's charges escalated. Her bail was denied. And just when I thought nothing could shock me more, the biggest twist of all dropped in my inbox. An email from the bank. Apparently, Sierra had been trying to take out a home equity loan on the house before she got arrested. She'd forged my signature using an old document I'd once left in Grandma's drawer. The only reason the loan didn't go through? The bank flagged the signature when she misspelled my middle name. She misspelled my own middle name on a loan for $75,000. The moment I handed that email to the detective, I knew Sierra had finally crossed the line she couldn't step back from. Forgery, attempted fraud, elder financial abuse, property theft, destruction of personal belongings. The list just kept growing. I didn't even have to exaggerate. The facts spoke for themselves. And with Grandma's handwritten records, every accusation had proof. 2 weeks later, the DA officially pressed charges. Sierra's smirk vanished during her arraignment. The court denied her bail again. Her public defender argued that she was going through a tough time emotionally and didn't understand what she was doing. But the judge didn't flinch. "This wasn't desperation," he said. "This was entitlement and cruelty." Meanwhile, I focused on reclaiming what was mine. With the eviction finalized, I cleared out what was left of Sierra's belongings from Grandma's house. Most of it was garbage, cheap clothes, empty liquor bottles, crumpled receipts. But hidden in a shoebox under the bed, I found something that made my stomach turn. Photos. Not of family, not of Grandma. Photos of me. Screenshots of my social media. Candid shots of me outside the hospital. Notes scribbled on the back, like work 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., Tuesdays and Thursdays, and keep spare key behind potted plant. I felt sick. She hadn't just wanted the house. She wanted my life, my peace, my identity, maybe even my safety. I turned those over to the police too. From there, everything unraveled for Sierra. The shop where she'd sold Grandma's jewelry cooperated with the investigation. Every item was documented. Some were recovered. Some weren't. But it didn't matter. The intent was proven. The forged loan application, that sealed the deal. Even her own mother, my aunt, refused to speak in her defense. She always thought the world owed her something, my aunt told me quietly after the hearing. Maybe now she'll finally understand the cost. When the trial ended 3 months later, Sierra was sentenced to 4 years in state prison, with a possibility of parole after 2. The court ordered restitution. She had to pay back the value of every stolen item. And because of the fraud charges, her credit was destroyed. She wouldn't be able to take out a loan, lease an apartment, or open a credit card for years. But the real punishment? Everyone knew. Her mugshot made the local news. Her name was on every report. Her job prospects evaporated overnight. Even her old influencer friends blocked her. Whatever fake image she'd built for herself on social media crumbled the second people realized who she really was. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding. I renovated Grandma's house, not to modernize it, but to preserve it. I kept the mint garden, reupholstered her old rocking chair, restored her bookshelf, and filled it with the novels she loved. And I turned the guest room into a reading nook with framed photos of us through the years. I moved in last month. Every morning now, I drink my coffee on her front porch. I plant new flowers where Sierra once parked her car. I live without fear of hearing slamming doors or screaming matches. And most importantly, I live without guilt. I didn't destroy Sierra. She did that all on her own. I just stopped protecting her from the consequences. And as for Grandma, I think she'd be proud. I honored her the only way I knew how, by standing up for myself and finally putting an end to the cycle of silence and sacrifice. She gave me a home. I made sure no one could ever take it again. Comment the number 1 if you felt that twist and want more real revenge stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe. I've got more than one story where karma came back hard.